Well, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Pearson. I'm the assistant conductor for the Symphony of Northwest Arkansas, and I'm joined today by our guest conductor on our upcoming concert, David Glover. Welcome, David.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. It's great to be here.
Yes. So we are excited about your upcoming concert on Sunday, November 2nd. It is Celebration in Motion, Beethoven 7. But before we start talking about all of the music, which we want to do, we would love to get to know you a little bit better, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so we'll start by maybe how did you first get into music? What was maybe your first time? What instruments? Where did that begin for you?
So I started violin when I was 5 years old,
Okay.
but my love for music went before that. In fact, I don't even remember when I first heard classical music. Like I just hear from my parents because my mom said she played the Italian Symphony for me, Mendelssohn 4, when I was less than a year old, and just I went crazy for it, like moving around on the floor.
Yeah.
So they just started playing more for me. And like early on, I was fascinated in conducting, by conducting, just watching, I think it was a mostly Mozart telecast on PBS.
Nice.
And I just went around imitating the conductor all the time. And it's just stayed with me ever since.
Very neat. So you started on violin. Did you stay with that like through undergrad and then, or did you go right into conducting or?
No, I actually have a master's in violin too.
Okay.
So I really wanted to make sure that I had experience playing in ensembles and playing chamber music and understanding like what it's like to make music from the inside before I
Absolutely.
felt like I could stand up in front of a group and really communicate my vision to them. Yeah, so I did that until I was 24 and then did a conducting degree at Indiana University.
Very neat, very neat. So can you think of, and I'm sure there has been some influential like people along the way that help kind of steer the trajectory that you're at today in conducting, where there's people, mentors.
For conducting, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, definitely. So my time at Indiana, working with Thomas Baldner and David Efron, and
Mm.
just, I mean, they had so many years of expertise behind them and watching. In Indiana is such a big school. There's a lot of guest conductors too.
Yeah.
So we got a chance to do master classes with Leonard Slatkin and Herbert Bloomshot, and just so many like amazing conductors that came through there. And you learn something from everybody.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah.
I had a chance to do a master class with Pablo Yarvi once,
Mm.
and just like his inspiration and his ability to communicate what the music is about. Not the rhythm in the notes, but like the essence of the emotion and
Yeah.
the character behind it is really powerful. So yeah, I feel like I try to take something from everybody I come in
Mm.
contact with, and being an assistant and associate conductor, first with the Indianapolis Symphony and then with North Carolina, I worked with lots and lots of guest conductors, and every person has a different take, like on how the
Yeah.
orchestra works and on the music, and you build so much from all of
Oh, absolutely. And I'm very much there too. So I get
that.
that. So as far as like your artistic vision and like your conducting style, let's talk about that because people are curious about that. Does that look like? Especially, from their perspective, they see the orchestra, they see you working, and they just are curious what that process is. So maybe could you tell us a little bit what your process is in preparing the scores before you begin a rehearsal? What does that look like for you?
So for me, the first thing I do is get to know what's on the page. It's like, what evidence did the composer leave us? The notes, the dynamics, the harmony. If it's a super complicated piece, I'll sit down and play individual lines on the piano. So I do play some piano, even though
Mhm.
violin's my main instrument. But it's so helpful to play harmonies at the
Oh,
keyboard.
absolutely.
It's hard, on a violin to do a lot of that. So I'll sit down, I'll play some things, I'll sing through some things till I feel like I have a good idea of the music. And then at that point, I usually do a lot of historical research too. And for some pieces, there's a lot. For other pieces, there's very little
Right.
evidence, about what was the composer doing, what circumstances was it written in, how was it received. Recently, I just conducted Beethoven's Third Symphony, and there's just books written, right, about like
Right. Yeah.
what Beethoven was doing and how he was doing it. So I delve into that, and then I start, once I know the facts, then I create my interpretation. Like, what is
Yeah.
my vision for this piece? What do I think the composer is trying to say?
Mhm.
And then figure out how I'm going to communicate that to the orchestra.
Exactly. So you have all of those pieces and you come well informed. How will you build trust and connection with the orchestra in the limited rehearsal time? So you have, when you come in on Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, and then the show is Sunday. What does that look like for you? How will that happen?
Yes, that's a quick time, and those first few moments are always really important for both sides to get to know each other.
Mhm.
But I think at first it's very important to listen. As a conductor, you come with how you want the piece to go. You come with your vision, but that's only going to be part of the puzzle in the actual performance. What the musicians are bringing is sort of the other half of that puzzle. So yeah, it's a good idea, I think, at first to play through a movement, sometimes two, depending on how it feels, just for the
Oh yeah.
orchestra to get to know you and for you to get to know the orchestra. Like, where is the orchestra stylistically? Because with a composer like Beethoven, for example, and we're going to be discussing the Seventh Symphony, there's a lot of different angles that an orchestra can be bringing. There's sort of the traditional way, there's the historically informed way. Like, where is the orchestra
Mm,
on that journey? And then you start trying to figure out like how do you match your vision with theirs and come up with something
yeah.
new. And the exciting thing is that yourself on your own or the orchestra on their own, you can never achieve what you're going to do together because it's
Oh,
kind of two different
absolutely.
visions that mesh together and you create this new third thing. And I think that's what's exciting about the process.
Yeah, it's an incredible collaboration where it's bringing life to the music off the notes on the page together, and it's just a neat way to make it all happen. So, can you think of maybe some non-classical genres of music that possibly have influenced your approach to conducting, or maybe some music that you like to listen to outside of classical? Everyone has
So
like their jam.
one world that I've been like exploring quite a lot recently is big band music, like music from the
Mm,
40s.
yeah,
And some of this was just that I enjoyed listening to it.
yeah,
But then with my orchestra in Virginia right now, we have a lot of players in the orchestra that have jazz talents as well.
nice.
So we've been doing some big band concerts on the side, like outside of our main series, like Valentine's swing dance
Oh
type
yeah,
thing.
absolutely.
So I started leading those, and at first it felt really strange because I'm a classically trained violinist. What do I know? Music for a band for brass instruments. But it's been really awesome to dive into that music and understand like how it's put together and what overlaps with classical and what doesn't overlap with classical. And really like in the early 20th century, there was so much like crossing between those two
Oh,
worlds.
absolutely,
You
yeah.
think about like Ellington and Ravel and Debussy, like classical composers were interested in what jazz composers were doing and vice versa. And so that's been cool that it's a different world, but there's still these elements that are similar.
Yeah, it's very much like there was no box. Like I love how everything morphed from, Scott Joplin forward. It just
Mm.
people were like free to compose, and that's cool that you were referencing that. We actually do a thing, well, have done a thing in the past called the Battle of the Bands at SoNA, and it's a lot of fun where we do the orchestra battles against another local jazz group that comes in, and it's a really fun concert. Uh,
Yeah, that
yes.
sounds great. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, you mentioned a box, and I think sometimes when there's a lot of rules and a lot of tradition, like
Yeah,
so much of that is great, but it can also feel really restricting. And sometimes you
yeah,
need to explore, with less of those constraints on you to see like new
absolutely.
avenues exist.
Absolutely. So we'll wrap up with this last question towards you, and then we'll dive into all of this great music for the program. What would be the most rewarding or most challenging aspect of conducting live music?
Mm.
That's kind of a deep one, sorry.
Yeah, well, I think in a lot of ways it's the balance between the technical and the musical. Because in the end, the goal for me is to express to the audience the emotional essence, like the truth of the music. But to get there, there are like certain technical elements that have to be correct. So you have to balance those two things, like the technique and all the study with the freedom to be expressive, and finding that line, like walking down the middle of those, I think is something that, as musicians, we're always searching for.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so that I always find is the challenge. Like, how do I set up this performance of the way that then I can be as free as possible?
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. So let's dive into your program. So
Yeah.
a theme of it is celebration in motion, Beethoven 7. Maybe we'll just start with the first work that I have listed here. I'm assuming that William Grant Still's Festive Overture is going to be the starter.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's
let's talk about that one first.
Yeah, so this is one of those programs where I mentioned sometimes you'll find books written about something, and sometimes you'll find a sentence. And this is one of the ones that's more like a sentence that exists.
Right.
William Grant Still is a very successful, famous composer in the early 20th century. He was one of the first Black Americans that had his music performed by major orchestras. And this particular piece he wrote in 1944. It was for a composition competition to write an overture. It was for the Cincinnati Symphony. And there were all sorts of famous people on the jury, like Pierre Monteau. And they judged the competition blind. So they removed all the names off the compositions and just looked at the music. And apparently the committee was really happy when they learned it was Still because he was already a well-known composer by that point. And they felt like they had done a good job that they picked somebody by, or a piece by such an amazing composer. Um, but it's interesting that he calls it Festive Overture, but it's written in 1944, which has got to be one of the darkest years, right, in the
Yeah.
world and definitely in this country. I think sometimes composers do that. They write like against the mood. It's
Oh
like,
yeah.
if you're in a really happy moment in your life, sometimes people write the most like angst-ridden, piano quartet ever.
Right.
And then conversely, if it's really dark, sometimes, it's like aspirational. You're hoping that the future will be different. So he writes this piece that to me, it doesn't sound exactly like Copeland, but it has some of the same elements to me as Copeland's Americana music does, where you feel a sense of the land, that we have these big, wide open spaces in America, that we're a big country. And I also feel like this kind of like can-do American attitude that especially existed in the early and mid 20th century. This idea that we can build something bigger and better. It's got, sort of bright-eyed, bushy-tail type of character to it. I think it's a really fun way to launch off this concert.
Yeah, it wakes up people's palate to listen, and like you said too, it's very Americana. Like so, it like instills hope. And I think maybe during that time that was one of the things. Maybe you should have called it the Hope Overture, right? He was very hopeful and inspired by the possibilities that could exist outside of the overarching looming sadness that was happening in our world at the time. Yeah. Yeah, but you're right. Yeah, part of our thing we do with Inside of the Music, I research articles and music to share with our patrons, and there wasn't quite as much on William Grant Still. I found some really good nuggets that we'll share, but yes, there is very, very limited. And then when you get to Beethoven, there's pages,
There is a
books,
lot. Yeah.
volumes. So let's move on. Next on your program, I'm not sure your exact order yet, but I know we have Jessica Montgomery's Starburst. We want to talk about that one?
Sure. So that's actually the opener on the second half.
Okay,
So
okay,
we
sure.
kind of have it designed where there's a short opener and
Yeah,
then more of a main course on
sure,
each half.
sure.
So yeah, Jessie Montgomery is a wonderful contemporary American composer, and she writes great music, especially great string music. She understands string technique so well, being a string player herself. And Starburst is this short burst of energy for just the string section. I thought also to feature just the strings would be this fun palate cleanser
Yeah,
between the two
absolutely.
bigger full orchestra pieces. And so this piece, she says, is to describe in music a starburst, which is this moment like in a galaxy where many stars are born at once in a way that alters the nature of the galaxy. And she also says that's very similar to how she feels about the organization she wrote it for, which is the Sphinx organization,
Right.
which gives opportunities to young Black and Latino musicians, and gives them training. And they also have an orchestra that plays. So she wrote it for them as this way of showing like this new energy that's creating this new dynamic.
Yeah.
And it feels both celebratory and like there's so much motion. Like the string figurations just rocket through this piece.
Yeah, it gives. a little bit of a Hulse feel to it, like this exciting, like the sound that and like very
Yeah.
ethereal. Yeah.
Yeah, that opening in
Yeah.
Jupiter, the
Yeah.
Starburst and Jupiter like has that same sort of like arpeggio that like
Mhm.
you feel like you're coming across something magnificent in space.
Absolutely. It paints an incredible, like, imaginary picture in your mind. I think our audience is really going to enjoy it as they listen to it. They'll be able to, just kind of take their minds to a different place and when the music that we play out of that comes out of it, I think.
Yes, it has. She creates so many colors, even
Mhm.
though she's only using violins, violas, cellos,
Right.
basses, that are all like pretty related instruments, but it's just so colorful. And I've done the piece a few times, and it's just always it's a ton of fun.
Absolutely. And then we move to your other piece, which would have been on the first half because I got them out of order. But we're going to Smetana's piece, right? You want to talk about that one?
Yeah, so this concert is all about celebrating, but each piece celebrates in a very different way, right? So the Montgomery is celebrating starburst and also creative energy. The Still has this generic sort of festive beginning, and the Smetana is celebrating culture and homeland. So he writes the six movement piece called Mvlast, which means my homeland, and he's from what's now the Czech Republic, but was in Bohemia.
Yes.
And he writes each one of these movements about a different aspect of the land, nature, or culture. And I picked these are probably the two most famous movements, but they make a really nice pair because they are so
Mhm.
different, even
Right.
though they're both celebrating this heritage. So the first movement, which is called the Moldau, is
Mhm.
it used to be really often performed. Like back in the 50s and 60s, I think it was one of the most
Yeah.
performed pieces. You see it less these days, but it is so beautiful. And it describes the river, the Moldau or Vltava, that goes through Prague and that part of the Czech Republic. And it tells you a journey. Like apparently, Smetana took a ship down the river once, and he was inspired to write this piece. So you get a sense of the water flowing, but you also hear a hunting party going down the side
Yeah,
of the river. You
exactly.
hear a rustic wedding as you go
Yeah.
by. You go through rapids. So it's such a descriptive piece about nature. Um, I can't think of many other pieces that maybe are like as literal as this. Perhaps
Right.
like Beethoven 6, the Pastoral Symphony,
Right.
has that same type of like
Right.
journey through the land.
Yeah. Mendelssohn's Fingal's Cave feels a little bit like that, but
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be another good example. Yeah, but it's really like this
Right.
travel diary. Every 2 minutes a different scene. And then so it's a very lyrical piece, but then
Absolutely.
juxtapose that with that, we have Sharka, which is it's actually the one movement out of all of Mavlas that
Mhm.
tells like an old folk tale, like a myth.
Right.
And it's a very bloody story. But it's supposed to take place in I think the 8th century. So, way back in history, and it's not something that actually took place, but it's basically like a battle between men and women. So the story goes that women were in charge of Bohemian lands, and then eventually the men took over, but the women tried to fight back. And
Right.
Sharka was this warrior, and she ends up seducing one of the warriors named Shtirad, and she gives him and his men a sleeping potion, and they fall asleep. And she, with her hunting horn, calls in all the warrior women, and they slaughter the whole army at the end of the piece. So it's the exact opposite of Moldau. Instead of having this beautiful natural unfolding, it is so like, visceral and punchy
Mhm.
and aggressive. So they're a great sort of compare and contrast from the same composer.
Absolutely. And the whole suite's exciting. I did it last year with the Cleveland Orchestra that I'm the music director for, and it
Mm.
tells an incredible story. But the two movements that you selected, I think, are people will catch a great sense of what the whole work is about for sure.
It is, and it's so descriptive too. Like so,
Yeah.
at the end of Sharka, where all the army falls asleep, the second bassoon comes in with this really
Right.
low note to be the snoring of the army. So I really feel like you can follow the story in the music. He's so specific about what he shows.
Yeah, I love how music tells a story. I think all music does in its own way, and it's very exciting. So let's talk about our final work. This is on the second half. This is Beethoven 7. And I'll let you take it from here. Obviously, it's in four movements. This is towards Beethoven's later period. So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, so there's one connection on here I didn't even realize when I
Oh, yeah.
programmed it, but I noticed later, which is that both Smetana and Beethoven went deaf.
Oh, yeah.
And they wrote both all the music you're hearing on this program when they were pretty much
Mm,
very close, if not completely deaf. And it's just
absolutely. Yeah.
amazing that, musicians at a high level like they were able to hear these amazing musical dramas in their head
Mm,
and write them down, even though they weren't able ever to hear them themselves. Um, so yeah, you were saying like all music tells a story,
it does.
and to me the Seventh Symphony, like it takes you on such a journey, and it was actually the inspiration for the whole concert,
Right.
right? So
Right.
we've called it Celebration in Motion, and to me that's those are the elements of the Seventh Symphony because it is so celebratory when you listen, especially to the outer movements. I can it's hard for me to think of a piece as joyous as the last movement
Mhm.
of Beethoven's Seventh. Like it is hard when you're playing it in an orchestra to sit still, to not like come out of your chair because there's just so much energy that flies off the page. And then the other thing is that all of this music, the whole symphony is dance rhythms.
Oh, very much
And Wagner supposedly called it the apotheosis of the dance. And historically, there's always been dance music in symphonies. If you go back to Haydn and Mozart, right,
right.
there are minuets as the third movement. But here, every movement has these dance rhythms. Even the second movement, it really almost doesn't have a slow movement
Right.
because there's still this feeling. Maybe you could say it's almost like a funeral march because it has this sort of
Yeah.
like inevitable marching, and it does have a sadness about
Mhm.
it. But all the other movements, I mean, they are just dancing off the page.
Mhm.
But it's not dancing in the way like Mozart used dances, right? It's not courtly minuets. He's using rhythms that are really like earthy and folky, like of the people. And that last movement, the dance is you're not like at a ball. You're like
Yeah.
out in the field, with your
Yeah.
friends at, 11 at night and you're having a bonfire and a party and you're dancing around. Like it has that sort of like uninhibited freedom to it that I think is one of the reasons why this is up in the top five most performed, most famous symphonies out there. It's just
Yeah.
infectious.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, it's right up there with like his fifth for sure.
Yes. Yeah, and I feel like these days I don't have any evidence to back this up. It's just my feeling that I feel like seven is getting more popular than five. I
Mhm.
think because of this like joyous freedom to it
Yeah.
that we really respond to.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. Well, we are so excited about your concert coming up on Sunday, November the 2nd. Is there anything else that you would like to tell our patrons about your visit coming in?
Well, I hope everybody will come out and listen to this music. I think it's a really fun concert to listen to all the way through. The music is really vibrant and colorful and engaging. And I think each one tells a different story, or at least has a different angle, maybe on like the same subject. We're all celebrating things, but the music is all so different that I hope that, as you listen to the concert, that you hear connections and similarities and contrast between all these pieces that puts them in a new light.
Yes, for sure. And I really think that, it's an offering of so many different styles. So I think, you'll find something that you definitely like when they come to the concert for sure.
Yeah,
So
I hope there's something for everybody in there.
yes. Well, we're so excited to have you, and we hope to see everyone on Sunday, November the 2nd, for our celebration in motion. And again, thank you, David, for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Yes, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.